Welcome to Second Saturday Conversation. Here we explore Christianity in the 21st century and for the 21st century. Christianity in the 21st century is problematic for many of us, and Christianity for the 21st century remains to be seen and told. For those of us who still call ourselves Christian, the question arises again and again, what does it mean to be Christian? To what are we responding? And for those of us who don't call ourselves Christian, I ask the same question. What are we responding to? What do we long for and hope for and imagine is possible? This is part of our ongoing conversation here on Second Saturdays. Our overall title for this program year is Through a Glass Darkly, More Numerous of Windows, Superior for Doors. And I borrow from St. Paul and Emily Dickinson, a perhaps unlikely pairing. We know only in part. The glass is imperfect, but it invites us to imagine. I mean, that's a possible take on that title. And perhaps another take on that title, I can quote from our guest today. God is never the object of our knowledge, but the generous cause of our wonder. God is never the object of our knowledge, but the generous cause of our wonder. Next month, I'll unpack the title for this program year and also say a little bit more about the Emily Dickinson poem, I Dwell in Possibility. I want to remind us again that this year is the 10th anniversary of Marcus's death. He died on January 21st in 2015 at age 72. A 4-year-old friend of his, a 4-year-old, who realized that Marcus's death was near the birth date celebration of Martin Luther King. His name was Phoenix. Little Phoenix said, oh no, Marcus, too soon, like Martin Luther King. That was a 4-year-old who knew. The 10th year anniversary of a death is marked by many traditions as being particularly important, not only to remember the person and the contributions that he or she made, but also to recognize how the landscape has changed since they died and what has happened without them. I often wonder what Mark would think about what is going on today. He had such insight and clarity. I mean, he was inviting and kind, but he did not suffer from a failure of nerve. And I can say that about our guest today as well. Our guest is Mark Oakley. Mark Oakley is familiar with Mark's work, although they never met, and I wish they had. But today I bring them together. Before I introduce Mark Oakley, I want to call upon my friend and colleague, Jeff Creswell, who will orient us to the plenary time. The plenary is an opportunity for you to respond to what you've heard Mark say and make some comments or ask some additional questions. So Jeff, why don't you orient us a little bit to how you raise your hand and all of that. So good morning, my friend.
Good morning, Marianne. How are you?
I'm all right. Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Good to see you.
Thanks.
Good to be back. I missed our March
gathering.
Yes.
And I know you were doing important things. I'll ask you about that next month. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, welcome everybody. We're really glad that you're here. As Marianne said, we'll be having a plenary where you'll have an opportunity to respond to what Mark has to share with us and ask your questions. And in order to know about how we can call on you, if you go down to the very bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see that one of the choices is to react. There's a little heart there. If you click on that, you can see there's a little icon for raising your hand. And it'll just put a little raised hand in the corner of your Zoom screen. And that will let me know that you'd like to ask a question or respond. As is often the case, there are those of us who think out loud, and there are those of us who compose what we want to say before we raise our hand. And I'd like to encourage everybody to share that practice, because there are a lot of people and many people who would like to have a time to respond or ask a question. And so we'd like you to try to think about what you'd like to say, compose it in about 2 minutes. We'll give you 2 minutes to say or ask your question. And then if that 2 minutes, if we go over that 2 minutes, then I'll just put up a little finger like this, which is a gentle reminder that it's time to wrap up what you're saying, so that we can hear the response and allow other people to have a turn. So thanks, Marianne.
Yeah, great. Nice to have you back, Jeff.
Good to be back.
Yeah, good to see you. A word or two about Mark Oakley. Mark is Dean of Southwark Cathedral in London. The bio that I posted doesn't give you his full background, but it does highlight some of the communities that he's been in conversation with and that he's influenced and educated, and also that just to know that those communities have influenced and educated him as well. I became acquainted with Mark Oakley's work through a class, actually, that I'm taking with Scott Holland at Earlham School of Religion. Scott Holland teaches a course in theopoetics. I have so much to thank Scott for, including introducing me to Mark Oakley. And Splash of Words is the first book that I read of Mark's. And I highly encourage you to enjoy Mark and learn from him with his books. Splash of Words, Believing in Poetry. Actually, I just happen to have some books right here. The Collage of God. He talks about God and possibilities. My Sour Sweet Days. He reflects on the poetry of George Herbert and the journey of the soul, and The Way of the Heart, Our Seasons of Faith. These are wonderful, wonderful books. They are a pleasure, and you will also learn so much. There is something about Mark's poetic prose that quickens, and that quickens our longing, that quickens our soul as it journeys, that calls us to pay attention. And he has a deep intuition about what lies at the heart of everything. And maybe a spoiler alert, I think it's love that seeks to find us. Mark's voice, his word, his words, his humanity, it's what we need. And we are so fortunate to have him with us today and in these days. The title of his reflection today is Children in the Snow, Reclaiming a Poetic Faith. And that title and subtitle might be as enigmatic as Through a Glass Darkly, More Numerous of Windows, Superior for Doors. But he will say more about that. It is my pleasure and honor to welcome Mark Oakley with us today. Mark.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And it's a very, very generous, kind introduction. I want to...
My experience of you, just in writing, is that you are generous and kind. So it's quite fitting.
On a good day.
Yeah, on a good day. And we'll see what happens today.
Well,
That said, I hold by what I say.
I want to first thank you so much for your invitation to be with you all. And Marcus Borg remains one of the chief influences in my own thinking and belief, and therefore to be here in this 10th year is a great honor, as I express my own deep gratitude to him and to the foundation that is continuing his work. So thank you. Before my current work, I was the Dean of St. John's College in the University of Cambridge. And this meant that I was able to eat each night, should I wish, at a candlelit dinner on high table in college. It was a bit like sort of Harry Potter's Hogwarts. And when I showed up, of course, at the high table, the academics, known as the Dons, would often start talking about religion. One night, the topic turned to purgatory. One old and very grumpy old Don was confused. Purgatory? Purgatory, he said. Well, I mean, will I go to purgatory? Oh, John, said the Don next to him, it just wouldn't be purgatory without you. Well, I'm going to try to make this talk a little better than purgatory for you, if I can. And if I can't, well, I always take comfort in those wonderful words of Quentin Crisp, that if at first you don't succeed, failure may be your style. I'm here to talk, as you've heard, about poetry and faith, to my mind, two inseparable topics. And 10 years ago, whilst on sabbatical in New York, I began writing a book on the subject that, as you've seen, was eventually published as The Splash of Words, Believing in Poetry. And that subject remains very close to my heart. The Australian poet, Les Murray, once said that he thought of religions as big, slow poems, and he thought of poems as short, fast religions. Well, we might explore that idea, and I think we're doing it at a time where it seems to me, certainly in my context, that we're living with enormous imaginative bereavement in organizational Christianity. But as I begin, I do know that that word poetry is quite scary for a lot of people, because it can have really bad memories attached to it, or boredom, or humiliation at school when you were asked to recite one, or you were asked to explain one and you didn't understand it. Some people try again later in life. They go to a library or a bookstore and they look at a volume of poetry and see if they can get back into it, but then they see that actually you don't get many words for your money in a book of poems. There's a lot of space going on the page, and they sometimes just find that it's language but not as they know it, and they give up quite quickly. And this has got a name. It's called metrophobia, the fear of poetry, not fear of the London Underground, the fear of poetry, metrophobia. But I begin the book by remembering the day that I realized I need more poetry in my life. And I now believe that the world needs more poetry in it. I went to hear a British poet reading in London. She's called Wendy Cope. And she was there reading her poems. And towards the end, she read a short poem called Names. And before she read it, she said that this poem was about her grandmother. And I was brought up by my grandparents, so I tuned in quite carefully to the poem. And here it is. I thought I'd read it to you. So this is Wendy Cope's poem, Names. She was Eliza for a few weeks when she was a baby, Eliza Lily. Soon it changed to Lil. Later, she was Miss Steward in the baker's shop, and then my love, my darling, mother. Widowed at 30, she went back to work as Mrs. Hand. Her daughter grew up, married, and gave birth. Now she was Nana. Everybody calls me Nana, she would say to visitors, and so they did. Friends, tradesmen, the doctor. In the geriatric ward, they used the patients' Christian names. Lil, we said, or Nana. But it wasn't in her file, and for those last bewildered weeks, she was Eliza once again. I listened to those few simple lines, which I often use now when I'm trying to explain to young people the importance of names in a baptism. I listened, though, to those first lines that I'd never heard before of this fragile life cycle of a woman that you probably are feeling rather tender towards after just listening to 107 words. There's only 107 words in that poem. And I found I was crying when I first heard it. So if there are any preachers out there, memo to self, you can do extraordinary things with just 107 words. You don't need 107 minutes or 107 pages on an overhead projector. I suddenly realized that day that words have an extraordinary power, and I realized I wanted more of them. Now, of course, not all poems make you cry, far from it. But what became clear to me, I think, that day, and I was about 23, 24, and since then, this has just deepened in me, that when we talk about poetry, we are talking about a soul language, a way of crafting words that distills our experience into what feels like a purer truth. And this is, I think, what the Irish poet Michael Longley meant when he was asked once, where do you get all your poems from? All those words and images, where do the poems come from? And he simply replied, if I knew where poems came from, I'd go and live there. I called the book The Splash of Words because a good poem, it seems to me, is like the pebble that you throw into the lake. There is that immediate splash, a little bit perhaps like our response to hearing the Cope poem just now. That silence that finishes the poem is the splash of words. And then the poem begins to do its work. If you like, it ripples out towards our shores, and it can start shifting a few stones and a bit of the sand. And if you're, like me, a person who thinks theology is really a sort of beachcombing exercise, then the work of a poem brings things onto your shore that you might want to cherish and take home. I think the wonderful thing about a poem when it is working on you is that suddenly you realize that the unforeseen has become the indispensable, something you didn't see coming. You suddenly hear and you recognize it, it resonates somewhere deep, and now you do not want to lose it. It's indispensable. And although a lot of people will talk about books when they're reading them and they say it's unputdownable, I can't put it down. Actually, poetry books you should put down and you want to put down, because quite often something strikes you that you just want to put the book down and think about it, reflect it through a little bit more. So I always say poetry is a very put-downable book. And you need a long attention span if you're going to read poems. In the church, we often like to think we're rather good with language, and I'm speaking now as a member of the Church of England. This isn't always the case. I remember in London seeing a very large, gloomy poster outside a church trying to entice shoppers in to the church, and it simply said, "Tired of sin, then come in." To which somebody had written at the bottom, "But if not, telephone 642-789. But what I need to stress here is that whether we're good or bad at it in the faith communities, for the person of faith, language matters. And whereas we can get very obsessed in our churches about being relevant, it seems to me that we should be striving instead not for relevance so much as resonance. And thinking through the difference between those two words is important. John Donne, the Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral, which I can see out my window now, in the late 1600s, once asked what makes a good preacher, and he said, is it their wit, is it their cleverness, is it their fluency? He said, no, what matters is their nearness. When the preacher speaks, can the congregation feel that his humanity or her humanity is near to mine? And if it feels near, then they might continue to listen. And I think with poetry too, you sense the nearness of the words. They're reading you as you read them. I'm originally from a very rural part of England called Shropshire, and I was, as I said, brought up by my grandparents, and there are a lot of sheep in Shropshire. And at the bottom of my grandparents' garden, there used to be a lovely old man who was a shepherd, and he used to carry a shepherd's crook. And one day I joked with him that my boss in London carried one of those as well, a bishop. And I asked him, do you really use that to haul in naughty lambs and sheep? And he laughed and he said, no, what he used it for was he puts it down into the ground so deep that he can hold onto it and keep himself so still that eventually the sheep learn to trust him. And I've been desperate to be asked to preach at the consecration of a bishop ever since I heard that. Sadly, I've never been invited. But it seems to me that the pastor needs to be able to hold the self still enough to be trustworthy. But also all of us need that centeredness and a language that comes from that place, so that actually we might be people of trust, not only in each other, but maybe ultimately finding reality trustworthy. It's an important image, I think, for the person of faith, this drawing nearer to the humus, that's the root of our word humility, of course, the ground, but to be centered and find that inner stillness. And I think we need a language that's worthy of that vocation. And I believe that language is poetic. And I must say, as a sideline, 10 years on, I must say that what shocks me, and I'm talking about England now, is that as social media feeds have increased, the awful abuse of language by a lot of people who should know better, and scandalously by people of faith, cruel and vindictive and belittling and nasty. Language is sacramental and should be used carefully and with some reverence, it seems to me. But let's just go back to the problem of poetry for a moment, because by now you might be feeling, well, I can sort of see where he's going, but I'm still stuck on this poetry thing. I don't get it. And what I actually say in the introduction to the Splash of Words is that you might imagine that you were going on a holiday to somewhere you've never been before. I use the example of Belgium. And you think to yourself, what what would I do in preparation for going on that trip? And you would look up online the museums and the restaurants and the flea markets you want to go to or whatever. And you might even learn a bit of the language and read a bit of the history and so on. But at the end of the day, you know that however well you prepare for all this, when you get there, you will at some point just feel a bit lost. You won't understand, but you know that if you stick around long enough, it will start to make some sense probably. And I try to encourage people to think of reading poetry in that same sort of attitude, that the not knowing and the being lostness is actually part of the adventure. That's why we like to go on holidays, it seems to me, because we get a newness. The art form of poetry, of course, is huge and it's often perplexing, and you can amble in its landscapes, and you can take your time and you can be curious, and you don't need to learn all the rules and the laws for it, but you do need some motivation. And as I say, poetry is the same. You are going to be confused, and that's fine. And you're also allowed not to like it. That's fine too. This is language, but not as we know it. And difficulty is an important part of poetry, I think, as it is in life. Just when you look back at your own life, you can probably see that the most important times are often the difficult ones. As I used to say to my students, if you're going to go to hell, make sure you don't come back empty-handed. And it seems to me that in this life that does not come with subtitles, the point of crisis in a life is often the point of truth. And so with poetry, the crisis, as it were, of not being able to understand something might be important. It might be leading us into a new place. And so the attitude of reading a poem where you think, if only I was intelligent enough, if only Mark could explain what this poem really means, then I'd be satisfied. That's not really the attitude you need to read poems. It's more like, I think, listening to music. So if we listen to a piece of late Beethoven and I suddenly said to you, what does that mean? As if there's one meaning, we'd all think that's a bit of an odd question. What we do instead is talk about our responses to it. And I think it works best when we each talk about our response to poetry. And that's what Geoffrey Hill, I think, meant by the democracy of poetry. Each response is valid, and each of us can put into the pot, as it were, our own response to the words. The other thing I say in the introduction is, if you do a little exercise, if I suddenly said to you, here is the news, you probably tune your ears in a particular way to hear the news that's happened over the last 24 hours or so. And you tune your ears in a particular way. You're ready for the facts of the day, hopefully. But if instead of saying that, I said to you, once upon a time, you'd be equally expectant to hear truth, but you now know that it's going to come at you in a different form, and you tune your ears in differently to hear a story. And we like stories because it communicates meaning, but without resolving it at the end or summarizing it. And I suppose what I want to ask, or perhaps hint at here now, is, you know, when you walk into a place of worship, how do you tune in your ears? Have you got the news ears on, or have you got your poetry, story ears tuned in? Have you walked into a space that is celebrating the fact that, as you just heard, God isn't some object of knowledge, but the cause of wonder? And I often think that people walk into places of worship with their ears tuned in for one form of truth, And what they get is a very different form of truth. And it means that there's a sort of category error going on, and a lot of frustration is born in that. Certainly, if you go to a Christian service in one of those places of worship, I think you have walked into poetry in motion. If you think just what most of you do, whatever the traditions people come from, you stand up quite often and sing a hymn, which is a poem. Then you'll hear an ancient one, probably, called a psalm. And then all the prayers are full of images and metaphors and similes firing off all over the place, because frankly, what else have we got to talk about the divine? I'll talk about scripture in a moment, but even the body becomes poetic. If you're a Catholic cleric or you're a charismatic singer, quite often your arms go up into the vocative, and the motion of the body becomes, as it were, poetic. And I think the truth behind all this is that when a human being falls in love, the last thing you become is a literalist. When you fall in love, you're looking for a language that will express this deep feeling within you that needs expression. And you need to take your language, as it were, to the gym to train it up, to be acrobatic, to do this. And if you look at some of the things you wrote, perhaps when you were first in love, you'll see that you stretched language every which way to try and do justice. And I just say that if poetry is then the language of the lover, and the language of love, it must then be the language of the church, the language of the faith community, because we are also scurrying around trying to find words that will in some way do justice to the truth of God and the truth of ourselves. So as I say, when you're in love, truth is far too important to be literalistic with, and this makes me believe that, and I always used to say this to slightly provoke my first year students, fundamentalism is to Christianity what paint by numbers is to art. Now, just in case you think this is all a little bit English cathedral, I wandered lonely as a dean, let's just recall for a second the ancient traditions of the great world faiths and the place poetry has in each of them. So from the earliest sacred texts of Hinduism, the Vedas, they are in effect thousands of poems. The Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the Song of God, composed in verse. In China, the classic Tao was written poetically in the 6th century BCE. The opening verse referring, of course, to the gate of all mystery. Then we come to the Hebrew Bible, full of poetic explorations, the Psalms, of course, which is supposed to be the people's favorite book of the Bible, the noble language of Job, the Song of Songs, the riddles of the Proverbs, and then the prophets. The prophets who are warning people who they've turned into, and they do it very much through intense imagery and metaphor. And of course, that tradition is carried on into prophetic preaching into our own day. This is a message that today's church needs to be reminded of. I think that prophets always call us to a proper vision with poetic hope and never with prosaic plans. That's what they draw people with. I'll come back to the Gospels in one moment, but if you jump to the Quran, where God is the poetic author of a text so beautiful that Muslims develop a particular chant style for reciting it. So if you listen to that much repeated line that has the statement of Islam's a key belief, the Shahada, or confession of faith, there is no God but God. If you hear it in the Arabic transliteration, La ilaha illa Allah, you can hear the poetic consonants and open vowels, all emphasizing this belief that you recite in order then to translate into your life. And so in all these spiritual traditions, truth is being expressed through poetry for the faithful. And I want to express here that poetry isn't just a better way of saying it. It's not a little bit of sugar on the cake. Truth is actually found in poetic form. That's where the truth is being expressed. And all our later thinking, the sort of prosaic stuff, is around the initial and originating poetry. The Christian Gospels are not so obviously poetic until you study them, of course, and then you see the artistry that's going on in all four of the evangelists, as well, of course, as the persistently figurative preaching of Jesus himself. Jesus, as it were, often taking people on that trip to Belgium, probably in England would have scored a B- in his preaching class, because people always seem to be going up to him afterwards and saying, "What on earth did you mean by that? Could you explain?" But Jesus using a language, it seems to me, a parabolic language that hovers instead of comes into land. And he was a storyteller, and therefore poetic in his storytelling. So the Good Samaritan never existed, and the prodigal son never existed, and no Lazarus was ever at a gate, and no woman ever lost a coin, because Jesus made them all up. He made them up. He was a verbal artist and used all these riddles to great effect. His stories were not designed to make easy sense. They were designed to remake you. And that, as I said, involves a little bit of difficulty in the soul. Maybe for this reason, the Christian creeds found it difficult to make a very succinct reference to Jesus's teaching. If you read the creed, you recite that Jesus was born, suffered, died, and rose again. But of course, there was something in between all that. He taught. And I think his poetry would be very difficult to summarize in a creed like that. So I think they just ignored it. So when Jesus tells one of his parables, which leaves them scratching their heads often, one of the things we're told Jesus says at the end is, "If you have the ears to hear, then hear." And it seems to me he's saying, have you got the right ears tuned in? This is not the news. This is the good news. And you need a language that's gone into a state of emergency in order to get us to the kingdom. If you prefer another image from a later time, then Hafiz, who was an Islamic poet who wrote about the same time as Chaucer, said that actually such teachings pull out the chair beneath your mind and you watch yourself fall on God. So if you look at the heartland of the world's faiths and at the heartland of my own, the Christian way, then I think there is this one conclusion that God is a poet. And this is not a new conclusion. John Donne, who I just mentioned now, once, having read the Bible, wrote, "Thou art a figurative, metaphorical God, in whose words there is such a height of figures, such voyages, such peregrinations to fetch remote and precious metaphors, such curtains of allegories, such high heavens of hyperboles, so harmonious elocutions, as all profane authors seem of the seed of the serpent that creeps, but thou art the dove that flies." Well, you can see now why some people say that Donne is very good, but sometimes tries to be a bit too clever. Or as one scholar says, the thing about Donne is his brain rather went to his head. if I continue this idea that God is a poet, the tragedy is, of course, and the troubles begin when people of faith become cursed with a literalism, simmering down the richness and the ambiguities and the resonances into black and white things that are often weaponized, biblical bullets that are fired off. And I often quote Marilyn Robinson, who in her novel Gilead says that nothing true can ever be said about God from a defensive posture. When you decide to control the poetry, to decide what its one meaning might be, and it's normally your own, then we easily set ourselves up against others' insights and responses, and the language starts to lose its resonance and effectiveness. And I suppose, to put it very succinctly in the words of my poet friend Padraig Ó Tuama, whatever Jesus of Nazareth's death means, it doesn't mean something that can be written on a fridge magnet. Language is sacramental and therefore is about beginnings, not endings or closures. God is not a word for a bumper sticker. The early theologian John Chrysostom said that when we read the scriptures, we shouldn't hammer at a word or a phrase, hammering it to death, trying to explore what it means. He says, really, read the scriptures as you would a letter from a friend. Read the love between the lines. And if somebody's interpreting the scriptures to you and you cannot hear the love between the lines, then don't tune in for much longer. So what I want to finish is, well, okay, but what then does poetry have to do with my life and my discipleship, if we're on that journey, or my faith and reflections on God? It seems to me that in such a political and social climate that we find ourselves in at the moment, the making of poetry is being understood by some as a constructive and distilling ordering in a lot of dislocation and encroaching chaos in some forms. It's a source of potentially formative wisdom. And this is something that I think is very important, that in a world of information and sometimes bad information, poetry is not so much about information as about formation. It's about human becoming. It's about how the response to these words begins to shape us. The British poet David Constantine said recently that poetry keeps on saying what it is we risk losing, what we are losing and what we might do about it. It's a celebration of things that are threatened, things without which life isn't worth it. Seamus Heaney, the Irish poet, talked about a similar vocation for poetry in the world as redress, adjusting the balance so that we don't live by news speak, but by whole speak. We use poetry to bring the balance back when the world and its mechanisms are out of joint. Retrieving what's being lost, interrogating contradictions and identities, challenging injustice, and offering redress in a world view. All these things, of course, are also being embraced today as good for mental health, and poetry is often used in a variety of settings today towards whole minds as well. Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge, and where is the knowledge we have lost in information? Asked T.S. Eliot. And I suppose if I had to get to the heart of my own belief, I would say something like this, that God has given all of you and everybody a great gift. It is your being. And you are asked to give one gift back in return for that. And it's called your becoming, who you become in your life. Putting it another way, God loves you just as you are, but God loves so much, God doesn't want you to stay like that. And so we need a language in our faith that is not so much, as I say, about information as formation, and helps us with that human project of becoming. We need, and for many, the teachings of Jesus are this, a language that doesn't set out to answer all our questions so much as question all our answers. A language that can enlarge the heart and the mind and our understanding and our empathy. What we're more used to, of course, is prose, which fills pages, just carries on. But poetry, as I say, uses different forms, places language into different relationships. And by doing this, and one of my books is called By Way of the Heart. And I've picked up there the Welsh poet's insight that poetry arrives at the intellect by way of the heart. So it always goes that route before it ends up here. Of course, the other beautiful thing about poetry is the sound of it, that if everybody's out the house, try it one day, get a poem and just read it out loud, and you'll hear the poem hears the words and how they're caught up with meaning. And I often, again, tell students that in English language poetry, if you just think about how it's connected to your physical being, the rhythm of much of English language poem, you just need to think that in the middle of your body there is now a rhythm going on, hopefully, going titum, titum, titum. English scholars call that an iamb, the short long, ti-tum, ti-tum. And that's going on with your heart. And then you have your breath. And if you take one deep breath, how many titums can you get in it? Titum, 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 5. So you have 5 iambs, which is known as an iambic pentameter, which is the classic line of English language poetry. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? 5 titums, the heart in the breath. It's a very natural language to our bodies. It is what I'm trying to say. It's not, as I say, a quick read. It's not so much a river that you're putting across the page, flowing nicely. Poetry is not so much a river, it is a fountain from which you can patiently draw insights and truths. And if there is such thing as a creative writing course, I think poetry takes us on a creative listening course, a creative reading course. There's no quick clarity, there's no seductive easy answer, there's no one meaning, as I say, to be had, no conclusive evidence after a poem to take to court. You just get a group of people together and read the same poem, and you'll find that out very quickly. A final thought. And I say this because I think we're living in a time when we've never had so many words, but never been so disinclined to believe them. We're living at a time when the boundaries between facts and opinions and lies are publicly disappearing in many ways. We're living at a time when there's heightened self-promotion coupled with low self-awareness. And this is when we need education from many forms, educating the soul, educating the mind, a form of education that is passionate and fearless in the search for and sharing of truth, and through the many forms, as I've tried to show, that truth can be expressed in. And I suppose that when many at the moment are trying to be examples of power, at their best, the writers and the poets are trying to be not examples of power, but to show the power of example. They're trying to unlock gymnasium for underused imagination. And they're calling out to human empathy for a more substantial understanding, inviting us to be more than just consumers and competitors, spending money we don't have on things we don't want in order to impress people we don't like, this circle that we're often in today, but instead to be citizens with a language that is more dutiful to our human vocation. And that's why I hope people of faith will always be reminding the world that language needs to be used with care as something precious and generative and full of potential. And that's going to feel like a revolutionary act at the moment, but count me in. I also think it's very interesting how a lot of protest on our streets or at places where people have been shot or murdered or whatever often draw on poetry for protest. So this is not just a language for people who've been to university and like that sort of thing. This is often the language that is resorted to when people are angry and want change, because poetry is a language of potential and of challenge and of a stirring up the status quo to take us to a new landscape. And that's to end where the title came from, because Wallace Stevens once said that we ought to love poems in the same way that children love the snow. And I don't really know what he meant by that, but I think there is a snowfall that happens in the inner life, a slow settling of words that can change your landscape, both internally and politically. A snowfall that helps us spy, as it were, our own breath. When you go out into the snow and it's cold, you see your own breath. And then you see that all the roads have gone and you have to shovel a new path. This is what poetry has the potential to do. It helps you see yourself, to scrutinize yourself and the mechanisms that are so often ignored in ourselves, and to put a spotlight on them. But also then to ask yourself, which way do I now want to travel? And those who shape and protect words from abuse and the calculating weaponizing of them at the moment, I think, are important. There's much around at the moment that would prefer dishonest simplicity to an honest complexity. But the work of poets refuses to play that game. And it's a game ultimately that takes the oxygen out of our air. I think we need to discover our loyalty to the future. People of faith are often very good at talking about loyalty to the past, but actually our first call, it seems to me, is to have a loyalty to a shared future. And I think that is going to need formative and generative language that has the depths of what I like to call as a questioning joy. And I think we need to do this pretty quickly because it's urgent. And as Evelyn Waugh once said, the saddest words in the whole English language are too late. Thank you.
I want to give us a moment to just sit with what we've heard and what is stirring in us in response. And in just a moment, we'll go into our plenary time, an opportunity for you to respond to Mark's thoughts and thoughtfulness, or to ask a question. And while we're letting our thoughts come to the fore, let me read our guidelines for listening, okay? Those of you on Second Saturday, you're familiar with them, but let me just read them for us again, and then I'll have Jeff draw us into our plenary time. Let us just take time to become settled in God's presence. Listen to others with your entire self, your senses, feelings, intuition, imagination, and rational faculties. Don't interrupt. Pause between speakers to absorb what has been said. Don't formulate what you want to say while someone else is speaking. Okay, that's like talking over them. Speak for yourself only. Express your own thoughts and feelings. Refer to your own experiences. And avoid being hypothetical. I know this is not always easy. And steer away from broad generalizations. Don't challenge what others say. Listen to the group as a whole, to those who have not spoken aloud, as well as to those who have. Generally leave space for anyone who may want to speak a first time before speaking a second time, yourself. And then this last one is hold your desires and opinions, even your convictions, lightly. So this is part of our guidance for our hospitality in speaking and listening to one another. Jeff, I also know, Jeff, that you've been probably paying a bit of attention to the chat. As you know, I don't look at the chat during our session. I do want you to send me a copy of it so I can also send that to Mark. But if there's something in the chat that catches your attention, I give you the discretion to make use of that and to call on folks who have their hands raised. So do you want to say a little bit as we go into this?
Yeah, somehow the silence is full, and I'm a bit loath to interrupt it. There's a lot to think about, a lot to ponder. There's several people with their hands raised, though, and I'd like to give them an opportunity, Mark, to interact with you. And just a quick reminder, please try to keep your comments, your reflections to about 2 minutes. And I will remind you with a finger in the air that that time is coming to a close so that you can finish up and give other people an opportunity. And then I'll call on people as they raise their hand. So just a quick reminder that there's a little heart at the bottom that is a reaction. If you click on that, you'll see the option to raise a hand. That'll let me know that you'd like to say something to Mark. So let's begin with Richard Mallory. Richard, would you unmute?
Thank you. First, I'm really enjoying the pacing of this morning's session. And I'm appreciating the slower pace. Maybe that's always been true of Second Saturday, but I'm just especially aware of it today. Thank you, Mark, for your words. They push me and challenge me to go in the direction that I want to go in. And I'm specifically thinking about my relationship with the Nicene Creed. And the way I've made peace with it is to see it as poetry, even though its originators probably intended just the opposite, as if they could nail down truth. And there it is, absolute for all time. And I think that's the way the church has presented it. And of course, we believe. There's no room for diversity of different approaches to these words. In some way, I imagine it, the Nicene Creed is the Big Bang. And even in the translation, there's a sense of a little bit of poetry, a flow, and there's a beauty of this, I don't know, this manifestation, the gift of it all. But I once said that in a church, and a man became enraged with me for saying it was poetry. He said, people gave their lives for this, and they don't give their lives for poetry. And in fact, of course, it's poetry that would be more likely to inspire people to invest their life, not dry facts. Mark, any thoughts about the Nicene Creed?
Well, I love your reflections, and I'd be very surprised if there aren't a lot of people sitting here who are having resonances going on all over the place. I suppose for me, if you remind yourself that the story we live in is the story we live out. And I think for me, the creed is an historic attempt to show the landscape, the broad landscape in which Christian people are, the story they're trying to live in. And they don't spell out how you're to interpret those lines. They're just there. And a bit like a sermon, every sermon I give to 100 people, 100 different sermons are being heard. And not one of them is the one I'm giving, by the way. And I think it's probably the same with the creed. 100 people are saying these words. What's unifying them is the saying of them together. But we don't know how multiple the interpretations are that are going on. And that's fine. I think for me, that's fine. But perhaps what's important is the saying of it together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Richard.
Sheila Richards. Sheila, do you want to unmute?
Hello.
Hi, Sheila. Good to see you.
Thank you. This sigh came out of me on leaving me breathless. And I thank you so much for your presentation. And also to let you know that we have a lot of relatives in Coventry, England. But what I wanted to share was a remark that you made, and this is a story that you might know. So the little boy asked the rabbi, "Why did God make people?" And the rabbi thought for a while and was quiet, and then he said, "God made people because God loves stories."
Thank you. Yes. And of course, what you discover in the Bible is that the only way you can talk about God is by talking about human beings. Because that's what the Bible is, it seems to me. Quite often it's a story about us and humans, which then lead out and open up into a larger understanding of what the sacred might mean, the divine, and the fact that revelation means re-evaluation. You have to rethink yourselves through all this, but yeah, it's human stories that lead to the divine story.
Yes. Thank you again. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheila. Jel, welcome back.
Yes, I trying to remember. You said you were raised in sheep country. What was that?
Shropshire.
Oh, so we are just listening to the Shropshire lad talk to us instead of reading the poet. So I thought that was that's what I thought I heard, Shropshire. So I thought, oh, that's the first thing that popped into my mind. Anyway, when we talk about reading scriptures, poetry, it comes to mind that there are so many literalists out there. On Facebook, something has popped up on I get this Dan McClellan, who's a Mormon, sort of explaining things to people who are literalists. And I find it very interesting because I even find a Lutheran pastor who shows up, Tom Brooks, who's also a literalist. And what is it? What is your concept or your idea or understanding of why some people cling to the literal reading instead of seeing the poetic beauty that the writer who is trying to express a deep feeling is totally obliterated. It's like reading a newspaper. And I think there's more depth to the Bible than that. I was just wondering what is your take on why some people prefer to read it literally instead of poetically and deeper, as my English prof used to say, the inner hidden deeper secret meaning.
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably connected, isn't it, to a quite hardwired side of us that wants certainty. And we feel that certainty comes in sort of black and white. And, you know, one of the wonderful things that Marcus did was to teach people that you can take things seriously without taking them literally. But that needs explaining to people. And I suppose what worries me at the moment, and I'm talking about my English context, is so much of religion at the moment on offer in the Christian world is either what you might call ignorance on fire or intelligence on ice. And I want something in between, you know.
Yeah.
But I think this desire to say, okay, this is it. This is the text. My interpretation is the right one. Is just hardwired into many of us, and we just need to be helped out of it. It can be done. It can be done. Quite often it's done by difficulty, as I was saying to you before. Life suddenly takes a turn, or somebody helps you understand the beauty of ambiguity, and the fact that you can relax into truth rather than defend it. All these things, but you have to be patient, and for some it never comes. And I'm not going to judge people for that. It's just that I just know that the riches of the Christian faith opened up for me when people showed me that the wonderful thing about this is that it is a poetic fountain from which you can draw and recognize the resonances of human living in it. But as I say, if I knew why people love theological bumper stickers, you know, I'd make a lot of money out of it.
It seems like some people have adopted it as a survival mechanism. And they're afraid to live within the mystery.
Yes, and also, I mean, to say something on their side as well, you know, life's hard and can be difficult, and just getting through a day, getting yourself out of bed is the hardest thing of all. And so to have something that is to be cherished as a compass for your life is not to be ridiculed if that's what it's providing for them. But I would still hope that there's enough generosity in the air for us to have conversations together, and to say, you know, it's not that I think I'm better than you, but this is how the richness has come for me. Might it be the same for you? And
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jill.
Thanks, Jill, so much.
Judy Gibson. Oops, you unmuted for a minute and then went back to mute.
No, you're still muted.
You're muted, Judy. It's down in the lower left-hand corner. There's a little icon that says audio.
Can you find it?
There you go. There you go.
Super.
Oh, thank you for being patient. God.
Well, it's not
Um,
actually that spaciousness is just fun. Yeah, thank you for that, actually.
Yeah.
You didn't quite
You're
intend that,
welcome.
Judy, but thank you for that.
Unintended, but thank you.
Yes, yes, thank you.
I love John Donne, I must say, in metaphysical poetry. But I also really, really love John Keats.
Mm.
And I would like to know if you have a quick or something to say about John Keats and negative capability.
Ah.
Yes.
Yes.
Tell me why you are drawn to that. What is it about it?
To negative capability.
Mm. Mm.
I just also very much I love his poetry. I love his
Yeah.
use of color. I love the way he uses sound to evoke emotion. Yeah, I just find him a very complete poet.
Mm. Mm.
And not that John Donne certainly isn't complete in its own way, but it's also a very almost removed way from being with something. Whereas for me, with John Keats, I'm contemplating that Grecian urn. I am there with it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more fleshy, let's put it that way.
Yeah. And, by that view that he had, he is holding out the fact that I think poetry can hold you in a space of unknowing.
Yes.
Not just not knowing, but and of course the other thing I love about Keats is that he warns us. He says, beware of poetry that has designs on you.
Mm.
So there is such a thing as bad poetry, which we haven't talked about. But anything that's got designs on you, he was, I think, wise in warning us about.
Yes.
So yes, I'm with you. I think Keats is a wonderful poet, and that invitation to us to be able to hold, the negative, the not knowing, the unknowing, the pulling the rug from beneath our feet, as it were, is an important step towards the invitation of mystery. And that, this is something you find so deeply in the Christian tradition, particularly in the Eastern Christian tradition, that God is both omni nominabile, everything speaks of God, and in nominabile, you can't say anything about God. Go figure.
Yeah.
And we live in the in-betweenness of the omnibile and the innominabile.
Yeah, so he's kind of trying to get my voice or the poet's voice out of it, and letting the object or the idea itself speak and come forth. And I don't know, there's something about that.
And John Donne, of course, has a wonderful line where he says, churches are best for prayer that have least light. To see God only, I go out of sight.
Nice.
Yes. Oh, lovely.
Thank you. Yes, and nice to bring Keats into the room.
Yeah, really lovely, Judy. Thank you so much. And my take on negative capability too is that our ability to our capacity to hold that ambiguity. And this is a crude you can help me with a proper quote from this, but I think he says to live with this ambiguity, this non-knowing, without bitching about it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's a rough translation, but is that sort of part of his thought too, Mark?
Yeah.
Without
Absolutely.
complaining about it, without, sort of accepting it
Yeah, letting it,
Ambiguity as friend,
as,
not as enemy.
yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
That's a much better way to put it.
Mm.
Or lover.
Yeah, nice. Thank you, Judy, so much.
Thanks. Harvey Allen. You're still muted. Harvey, you're muted.
You're muted.
Is that
There
one
you go.
There you go. Okay, from the top.
Can
you see?
Where? Where does it do?
No, it says audio at the bottom corner.
No, that one. Oh, yes, of course.
Good
Yeah, we
now.
can hear you now, Harvey. Oh, no, you just turned it off. Isn't technology? There we go.
I think I'm there now.
Yes,
I was looking in the little boxes at the top where it's a red one, and clearly that was the wrong one. And I enjoy Keats as well. Beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all you know on earth and all you need to know. It takes a bit of time to. It's a hard one to work out, but it takes a bit of time to, and that's what it's all about, isn't it? It's the project of working it out for yourself. Mark, I'm very pleased to see you here. I have seen you before at Birmingham. Now, that's not Birmingham as many of these people here know about. It's Birmingham as in the Midlands of England. You came and addressed the Progressive Christian Network in one of their annual lecture series, which were dedicated to Marcus Borg, if I remember rightly.
yes.
And you excelled and provided us with a wonderful day of actually discussing this book. I wonder where that came from. And it was one of those things where you listen to a lecture and you say, I've got to get that book. I've got to get that book. And then as soon as you've got that book, you go, I've got to get another book. I've got to get another book. I've got to get another book.
Yes. Yes.
So that was
Sorry,
that
the
was a
same
wonderful-
happened to me. I understand.
Well, the previous year to yours, the second, I think, the second memorial lecture was given by Robin Myers, and of course he was the person who lectured us last year, and of course the same thing happened again. I've got to get a book. I've got to get a book.
Yes.
But he introduced me to the work of Barbara Brown Taylor, and that was another one we've had recently,
Yes.
particularly on quantum, how quantum physics fits into, and really what I'm getting to is that how much width there is in our understanding of God and his purposes, and where poetry itself is so important, and what you've done 6 years ago and now is giving me that sort of width, that wideness of our interpretation, and how I can still, that beginning of that first couple of lines of your book, Paternoster, Paternoster.
Yes.
Hallowed be thy name. You know, that sort of gentleness of a cart horse coming across with its big fluffy feet, and then a reminder of the hardness of the world. But that's just my interpretation. It's not other people's interpretation. But then the first Marcus Borg Memorial Lecture was.
Got a finger.
Oh, have I already? Right, so I'm sorry about that. But what I can go on there is that just quickly say that before that, 2 years before that, I went to a friend and said, "God, have you got a book I can read? I can read, John." I didn't bring one with me. He said, "Yeah, try this." And it was this one. I can't remember. I can't think of who the author was, but it's called "Meeting Jesus Again for the First Time," which led to that one and that one and that one and that one and that one. Oh, and that one. So really, what I'm trying to say is to you and to all of these others, thank you. That's really what I want to say.
Oh,
thank you for all that you said, and thank you for all that you've done to bring me into a new understanding of where we are in our Christian journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harvey. That's very kind of you.
Thank you, Harvey.
Lovely, Harvey. Thank you.
Ginny Kennerly. Ginny.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you very, very much, Mark. Thank you for pointing out that all great scripture is poetic and should be heard as poetry, also spoken as poetry. So my question to you as a dean is, how do we encourage in worship that those who lead worship, who read in worship, who pray in worship, respect the poetic quality? Because the poetic quality communicates. And when people just read the lines, you know, I always say, if you're leading worship, your words must go through your heart and your head before they come out of your mouth. But so often that doesn't happen. As a dean, it must be part of your responsibility to get people to do it right. How do you go about it?
Yes, if only people listen. Well, I thank you. It's a really helpful question, because if you're in a service like an Anglican service, and I know lots of people here won't be from the Anglican tradition, but if you just think of the Anglican setting, you know, a lot of time is put in to train up servers and clergy, and you know how to do it. But not so much is given to how to say it, and how you warm the words, how you help the resonance along, rather than read it as if it's just a telephone book, and go on autopilot. And this is not just a thing for the laity; it's for clergy too, I think.
That's right. Absolutely.
And I always say that I've been at a lot of ordinations, having worked in a cathedral, and Isaiah 6 is always read out at an ordination of deacons. And it always ends, as you know, with that line, "Here am I, send me."
Yeah. And
it's always read nearly always read by one of the people just about to be ordained, and they read it like this: "Here am I, send me." And everybody goes, "Oh, it's terribly moving, you know, they're just about to be ordained in a minute." But actually, I'm sitting there thinking, but shouldn't the emphasis really be on send? Here am I, send me. And I often remind people that, you know, you could say that even in the stress of one word instead of another, in one sentence, you change the theology of ordination. Is it about me, or is it about send?
Yeah.
And that makes people lighten up a bit and laugh, you know, but actually the serious point is that just as much as you prepare the altar or the font, so you ought to prepare the words. Absolutely. Because I think they're sacramental. And how you speak them matters. You're quite right. But it needs training, and quite often people need help with the context of what they're reading. You know, it's not just to say, "Oh, well, you know, I've got to read the Bible." You know, just to remind people, actually, this is a letter. Or, you know, this thing called a gospel wasn't actually really written to be read. It was written to be heard. So, you know, how are you going to help people hear it? And helping people hear is such an important part of reading in church.
Yeah. So how do you do it? I mean, do you have, as I live in Dublin, and I have something to do with one of the cathedrals, but it seems to me that people are not told how to read. There's no coaching, and I think there should be somebody in charge of the reading list who will put new readers through their paces and explain how best to do it. Do you do anything like that in Southwark, or is it just not possible?
We do, yes. All readers and all people who lead intercessions are brought together to, to explore exactly those things.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mark, I just wanted to share that I really resonated with what you said about preaching to 100 people and having 100 different things heard, and it wasn't what you preached. It made me think about, I've worked quite a bit with Parker Palmer, and he uses poetry quite a bit in the retreat work that I've done. And we talk about poetry as a third thing. And he uses the metaphor of a diamond. And he says, we put a diamond in the middle of the circle. That diamond is the poem. And when we read that poem and we allow you to respond to it, each of you is seeing a different facet of that diamond. And if we can listen without agenda, we'll get a much fuller picture of that diamond than if we simply see our facet of that diamond and then prepare to respond to you as you're talking about the facet that you see.
Yeah, wonderful. Yes, and Alice Walker has a similar idea where she says, when you read a poem together, you tell me how you respond, I tell you how, and we bring in everybody, and we end up with one enormous interpretation that not one of us had to begin with.
Exactly.
And that's why I think it was W.H. Auden who said, if he didn't say it, he often quoted it, a poem can never be finished, it can only be abandoned. There's no closure on this.
Yeah.
You can walk away from it, but the poem hasn't closed down.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
And we can come back to it again and again.
Yeah.
Well, Marianne, I think we're just about out of time. We still have other hands up, but perhaps those people would be willing to stay for coffee hour and we can continue the conversation.
That would be great. That would be great. I hope that those of you who do have hands up can stay for our next, we'll have about another 20, 25 minutes. So if you can stay, that would be lovely. Mark, I think you described George Herbert as someone who is deeply in tune with the human heart and with the agitated mind. And I would say the same is true for you. Thank you so much for today. And I'd love to have you back.
Thank you. I'd love to come back.
Lovely. Let me say our next second Saturday conversation will be May 10th. And then we'll also in May, we'll have on the 17th, we'll have our third Saturday reflection. That'll be the last one for this year. And that's a small group opportunity. I'll send out invitations for all that. I want to say a little bit about the music I've chosen for our closing music. It's Chopin's Ballade, number 1, opus 23 in G minor. It's perhaps one of Chopin's most well-known works. And I'm playing a shortened version of it. The ballade actually goes for 9 to 10 minutes, but you'll hear about 4 minutes and 27 seconds of it. And I'm drawing from the 4 minutes and 27 seconds is from the movie The Pianist. This was played in The Pianist, and the Pianist, a 2002 movie, was inspired by the autobiography titled The Pianist: The Extraordinary True Story of One Man's Survival in Warsaw, 1939 to 1945. And the movie is about a Polish-Jewish radio station pianist, Władysław Spielman, and he sees Warsaw changing gradually as World War II begins. And it's a very powerful movie, and this is a piece that is played in the movie. And by the way, the piece that we will hear, it is played by Władysław Spielman himself. So I wanted to play that today. It's beautiful and haunting. and somehow thought it was appropriate to hear this music in these times. Mark, would you just send us off with a benediction?
Well, what I thought I'd do is, you've just mentioned him, is I thought I might just read a Herbert poem.
Oh, my dear, excellent. That would be lovely.
And what happened, what's often forgotten is that George Herbert was only ordained for 3 years, and he died at the age of 39. And when he knew he was dying, he had tuberculosis. He'd never published any of his poems, and he sent them in a little collection to his friend, Nicholas Ferrer, and he'd ordered them very, very carefully. And he was one of the first people to use titles for poems, which is the first little key into a poem quite often. And right at the end of the collection, and he said in his note, he said, have a look at these. If you think they're any good, I'll leave it to you what you do with them. If you don't, just put them on the fire. And Nicholas Ferrer didn't put them on the fire, thank goodness. There's about 170 poems. And right at the end of the collection, as I say, carefully ordered, is this poem. And he called it Love. And I think he was really saying the last word has to be love for the Christian. And here it is. Love bade me welcome, yet my soul drew back, guilty of dust and sin. But quick-eyed love, observing me grow slack from my first entrance in, drew nearer to me, sweetly questioning if I lacked anything. A guest, I answered, worthy to be here. Love said, you shall be he. I, the unkind, ungrateful. Ah, my dear, I cannot look on thee. Love took my hand, and smiling did reply, who made the eyes but I? Truth, Lord, but I have marred them. Let my shame go where it doth deserve. And know you not, says love, who bore the blame? My dear, then I will serve. You must sit down, says love, and taste my meat. So I did sit and eat.
And thank you, Mark, for taking us in hand as we have sat with you today and ate. Thank you. And I'll look forward to seeing some of you for continued conversation at coffee time.